Hello, everybody. I'm Rebecca Roberts. I'm the curator of programming for Planet Word. Welcome to tonight's program, The Many Voices of Julia Whelan. If you are a member of Planet Word, if that is how you found out about tonight's program, thank you so much for that support. It's really vital to us. The museum is free. We want it to always be free. Membership is a big way we're going to be able to keep being able to offer free admission. If you're not a member and would like to find out more about membership, head on over to the museum's website, planetwordmuseum.org. That's also where you'll find a newsletter sign up if you want to find out about upcoming programs and see the whole event listing of the programs we have coming up in the next several weeks. So that is enough of me talking. Let me introduce tonight's guest. Julia Whelan is one of those people who has played with words in so many different media. She's just the perfect guest for us here at a Museum of Words and Language. She is an actress. She is a writer. Her book, My Oxford Year, was really popular when it came out. It's been optioned for a movie, but you probably best know her as an audiobook narrator. I think she's narrated over 400 audiobooks. Including just recently, the one I most recently listened to was The Invisible Life of Addie, LaRue, which was terrific. So Julia Whelan, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Flying in. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
So you look like you're in a little soundproof box.
I am in my little panic room,
little soundproof box.
as befits the end of the world. I am yes, this is my booth. It's as small as it looks. It's about 4 by 4. And I just tuck in here and read books.
So when you're reading an audiobook, you don't have a director? Do you have someone in your ear, or are you just kind of paging through?
Sometimes I do, depending on the publisher. Most Penguin Random House books, for instance, have a director, but for the most part, I'd say 85 to 90% of my books, it's just me uh, talking to myself.
That must be so strange.
It's very
Acting
strange.
aside.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's especially, I think as an actor, particularly, to not have any immediate feedback in with what you're doing is a different skill set entirely, and something that I definitely needed to develop in order to be able to do this job.
Yeah. Well, also you started as an actor as a kid, right?
Yeah.
How did you even get into it?
I was a kid that was always I think I started when I was 5. I just loved it. It was not parent driven. I was not I was They were indulgent. Um, but it was something that I was very interested in. I was a kid that was always into story, whether that came in terms of acting or writing. I was an only child, so I think I was just making up a lot of stuff in my head to entertain myself. And yeah, it was something I consider it my first love, because it's really still the way that I see the world, and it's the way that I think like an actor. But it's at this point a part of me. And but when I was a kid, it was my main focus.
What do you think that means, that you see the world as an actor?
I see the world well, I mean, let's just jump right in. I definitely, I see the world from a place of empathy, and I think that that is a common view that I share with other writers as well, that we are looking at the human experience and trying to understand it and trying to empathize with it. And, so I was reflecting on this with a friend the other day, that I think one of the reasons I wanted to act was for me, the impulse was never to be famous. I think a lot of people, get into it because they want to be loved. Like I said, aforementioned, I was an only child. I had enough attention and love. But what I wanted to do was experience as many different types of people as I could. You only get one life, and that felt very limiting to me. And I just wanted to be able to experience as many different types of ways of living as I could. And that was the curiosity for me. And obviously that also leads into books and leads into reading books and writing books. I think it's the journey starts from the same place.
What kind of a reader were you as a kid? Were you a, like, I can't hear you calling me for dinner, I'm in Narnia kind of person? Or were
That's a
you?
good question. I definitely I loved reading. I loved historical fiction. I still do. Um, I Yeah, my mother would probably be the better person to answer this, but I remember always reading and reading widely, and I had a couple of teachers really early on who layered that in, like, part of the homework was to make sure you read a half an hour a night, and then write a little 150-word journal entry or something about what you were reading, nothing graded, nothing but just a kind of reading log, and it's amazing what something
Yeah,
that small does, but it creates the habit.
for sure. Y It would seem that being an actor and being a reader would automatically lead into being a narrator of audiobooks, but of course it doesn't for most people. Narrating audiobooks is a really specific skill, if you're gonna be good at it. How did you get into it?
It took someone else to point that out to me. I had never listened to an audiobook because I'm a reader. Because if it's up to me, I would rather read the book, and be in control of my experience of the book. So I had never listened to an audiobook before. I didn't even know that it really existed, to be honest. And then, when I was graduating from college, one of my best friends, her mother came up to me at graduation, and she happened to be an audiobook producer and director for a company called Brilliance. And she's the one who said, "You know, you have this child actor background and now you have this English and creative writing degree. I feel like maybe this would be something you would be good at." And just having no idea what she was talking about, it took me a while to take her up on that offer. And then when I got back to LA and was trying to get an acting career going again, and I just said, "Okay, well, let's figure out is this money? This involves money." And I sent
Can I
her
do this?
yeah, and I sent her a couple of demos, and she responded with a couple of books, and it just sort of snowballed from there.
I was having a conversation with I listen to tons of audiobooks but I choose what I listen to versus what I read. And for me, I want to listen to big sweeping epics. I want to be caught up in the production of it. For this friend I was talking to, she wants to listen to nonfiction, that she's much more likely to take on a big brick of nonfiction if someone's reading it to her. Do you have genres you particularly like?
As a narrator, kind of I mean, I agree with you that for me, the entertainment factor, just as as an actor is give me the, like, sweeping high fantasy 300 character, epics. It's challenging, but it's fun and it keeps me on my toes. That said, I think that I would say half of my career is about, recording for Autumn, which is a company that puts long form journalism on audio.
Hmm.
So, I spend a lot of my time doing very straight, nonfiction narration, kind of journalistic style narration. Um, and I enjoy that too because I think I I sometimes enjoy the process of taking rather dense or esoteric or intricate content and putting myself in the place of the journalist that wrote it and trying to lay it out to the listener. Um, at this point, I'm trying to think if there's something I don't enjoy. And I think it usually just that comes down more to my particular taste in terms of the quality of the writing, probably more than genre or category.
Yeah. Um, Tom in our Q&A says, one of the first things I do to determine whether to read or listen to a book is to see whether it was narrated by Julia Whelan. So
Oh,
there
thanks,
you
Tom. Yeah, well, thank you.
go. Brian in the Q&A is asking if your booth is at home. You own
It
your own.
is.
Yeah.
It is at home, yeah. When I first started in the industry, I was in LA and going into studios. There were a number of studios there, and traveling to New York or Michigan, or there's kind of all over the place. But the industry itself kind of shifted into home recording about 6, 7 years ago, and that's when I got my booth. And with the exception which meant that when the pandemic happened and studios closed, there was not really an interruption of work,
Mhm.
which was nice, and that's why most audiobooks kept going. You didn't notice a big stumble in the audiobook world.
Well, now I picture you alone in your booth narrating some epic with 300 characters, all of whom need a different voice,
Yeah.
right? You have to invent a voice for them. you have to keep track of that voice you just invented, even if there might be 100 pages between their appearances.
Yeah.
What's your system?
Um, yeah, very simply Pro Tools. The software saves me here. So when I'm recording, and I'm sorry, I'm gesturing here, but it's because I'm looking at my monitor I've got my mic here and then my monitor in front of me, and I always have a Pro Tools session open, and that's the software that I'm recording into. And when I do a character voice, like I have a nice few sentences of a character speaking, I stop recording and I go and I clip that section of the waveform and save it, label it as the character and save it so that I can find it again. And yes, that's true within a given book, but also, for instance, in a series where I might record a book and then a year goes by and I've got another book, and you just start collecting over the course of years, um, character samples, because you never know when somebody's going to come back. That's the nightmare scenario, is it's like book 7 and there's some minor character that was referenced in book 1, and it's like, I don't, no idea.
And how do you go about creating a voice for somebody?
Um, well, I think I mean, it's the very simple answer to that is just, I'm an actor.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to break that down into what that actually means, um, I'm looking at a couple of things. So first of all, when I do a prep read of the book, um, I'm keeping a character list of anything that the author, any vocal description that the author gives to different characters. That can be accents, that can be tone of voice. I also will keep biographical information. So even if it doesn't say explicitly that the character has a New York accent, but they're from an Italian family in Brooklyn, like, I want to know that. Um, and and then what I do is I take the the kind of main characters that are constantly relating to each other, that are always in some kind of constellation, and then I work on distinguishing those voices first, so that when all of those people are in conversation, it hopefully creates a something that's easier to follow for the listener.
And when you're doing a back and forth dialogue, are you switching line to line, or do you record all of one person's?
You're switching line to line.
Wow,
Yeah.
feels really hard.
I remember it being really hard. Like, when you first start, that's actually I had some books right out of the gate that were very difficult and taught me very early how to do this. I remember distinctly, I think my very first book was the main character, it was a YA novel, and main character was from North Carolina, and then she moved to Maine. And then the, like, sexy hero was Irish. And so flipping between North Carolina, Maine, Irish was that was like that I got a like, I should have gotten, like, a badge for that. That was really welcome. You are now an audiobook narrator.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Here's the deep end.
yeah.
We have a couple of people asking how many times you read a book before you record it.
At least once. At least once to do the prep, like I'm saying, creating a character list, and then also creating a word list of things that I either words I just don't know how to pronounce, or words that are author invention, like going back to the fantasy thing, some of those good character names with like 13 vowels and 2 apostrophes. Um, and and then at that point, I'll often go back and really deconstruct. Once I've got all of that set up, I'll go back and deconstruct the different parts of the book if it's challenging. Like, for instance, with Addie LaRue, and the author and I jumped on Skype to kind of game this out, because part of the challenge with a book like that is you're covering 200 years of a character's development. And it's not linear. It's jumping back and forth from present to past. And so tracking where the character is at any given moment, and in her case, what is happening to her accent at any point in the book, what is happening in her own life and her experience that is aging her. So even though she's a 24-year-old woman for the rest of her life, she is a 200-year-old, 24-year-old woman by the end of the book, and her life experience should live in her voice more.
Mhm.
So things like that sometimes require going back into a text and really breaking down how I'm gonna tackle um, the performance just on a technical level, like where to be cognizant of changes.
That's a character that really it really shows your chops, frankly, because for those of you who haven't read or listened to the book, it's called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and the premise, and I'm not spoiling anything here, is
Yeah.
the main character makes a deal with the devil basically to live forever, but she is a provincial French girl who 200 years later is a sort of millennial in New York,
Right.
but it describes that she still has sort of a shadow of a French accent, but a 16th century French, right? I mean, there's so many layers to her. She's getting more sophisticated, but then she falls in love, and you hear that in her voice, and she's getting further from her roots, but she's getting less in control of her emotions. I mean, it's just there's so much going on with her, and as you say, it's not even linear.
Right. And I mean, I had one of the conversations that I had with V was I was like, I'm doing this for you because I love this book and I love you so much. But I was like, I'm setting myself up to have people think I can't stay in an accent.
Right.
Like if I hadn't already done, as many books as I've done and people know, like it would be, I was just waiting for some reviews to be like, I mean, she's in and out.
Yeah,
It's not
right.
great.
Well, so there's the accents of Addie LaRue. Your own book, My Oxford Year, has British accents. You do accents a lot. Um, is that just sort of one more character trait that you're adding on to this thing you're developing behind the scenes? Or is it like, oh, phew, that person has an accent. I don't have to worry that much about differentiating them from other
Oh
characters?
yeah, no, it's always the character always first and foremost is who is the person, who is the, what's the character. The i- accents always become tricky only because well, first of all, if you're doing an accent in film, you have a finite number of lines that you're doing. Like I've done roles before where I've needed to have an accent on camera, and there's just a certain number of lines that you can rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, and you go into them. And with books, there's just in the production timeline, you don't have the time to work perfectly on every single line that character may have. Um, it's a lot of content. And so that can be challenging depending on your familiarity with an accent or not. Um, and I think that in the case of my Oxford year, even because as I was writing it, I was like, I'm really setting myself up for a challenge here. And I went to a dialect coach that I'd worked with before on a film, um, because I had 13 different British characters, and I said, "I need to be able to
Different
distinguish them."
classes, different, right.
And so we worked on a couple of chapters of the book just trying to differentiate voices, and it was a good opportunity for me to finally drill down into, British work because, I can, like, do a British accent, if I'm imitating Friends or something, but part of the problem is that when I was living in England, I was living in a town where it's kind of the like, Oxford is a little bit like the Los Angeles of the UK, where people come from all over, but then they just get softened into a kind of generic regionalism. So even my Welsh friends or my Cornish friends still sounded a little bit RP. Um, so I actually was happy to be able to use my Oxford year as a way to work specifically on that accent.
Vicky asks, how do you decide how to divide your time between recording, writing, and acting? Is it based on the offers you get?
Well, yeah, I mean, my full-time job is narrating. Um, and in order to make a living doing that, I have to do a certain number of hours. And therefore, it's kind of a question of what's left over. And writing for me has to happen in the morning before I'm in someone else's story. So I record in the afternoon typically. But part of the challenge when I was first figuring out how to do this job, I couldn't stay in the voice of my own writing because I was so influenced by the voice of the books that I would record in the afternoon. And when I was recording at such a pace that I would do maybe a book every 4 days, just turn around and go right back into another book, it could be YA to domestic thriller to memoir to like it's just all over the place, and it really affected my own writing for a long time.
Is that typical, 4 days to turn around a book?
Depending on the length of the book, most narrators, I kind of have a rule that, I try not to do more than 2 finished hours a day, which usually ends up being 4 to 5 hours in the booth, not just for, like, vocal health, but also just, I my own attention span. Um,
I think we're all
so
learning those limits, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, an average book can be 8 to 10 hours. Something like Addie LaRue is much longer, and I gave myself time with that because, again, the intricacy of the accent, so I actually ended up doing that one over about 2 weeks. I gave myself more time.
You narrated Tara Westover's memoir, Educated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got tons of acclaim for it. It's a beautiful narration. That's not just a very personal story, it is at times a harrowing personal story. Um, what was it different to sort of dive into somebody else's life in that intimate way? Do you know Tara Westover? Did you talk with her first?
I had exchanged a couple of emails with Tara, but at that time she was still in Cambridge, and, the because it was a Penguin Random House book, I had a director on that one, so I had Kim and then Diane McKiernan, who was the producer, um, who cast me in it, and we had a discussion kind of early on about the fact that I'd done memoir before, and my main thing, though, in approaching Educated was that it was so well written,
Mhm.
and it had prose that really was worthy of a novel, and so I said, "I'm a little bit I don't feel the need here to have a completely detached memoir sort of nonfiction read. I wanna step a little bit closer to what I would do in a fiction, setting, but pull it back a notch because I have to just let the very personal horror of what she's describing, I don't wanna editorialize it." That was kind of my main goal with that one, where if it had been fiction and you're trying to, like, lead a listener to this is the moment, like, kind of pointing it out, I wanted to let it be as horrific as it is, and it just kind of rolls through me and rolls off of the listener because that's the way Tara wrote it. And I especially didn't wanna editorialize my own anger at her family
Right, right.
she didn't have in the writing of it. You know, she had a compassion and a distance that I found remarkable, and I certainly didn't want my own opinions to color the way that she had truly written it in a way that she was comfortable with.
Yeah, I had exactly the same reaction to that book, that she was so generous to her family in a way that I don't think I ever would have been able to find within myself to be, given the abuse that she suffered. Did you have to was that the kind of book where it was harder on you? Did you have to kinda take breaks, or did you channel her energy there?
No, that was hard. There are some books, um I mean, they're usually fiction to be fair, but they're still very difficult. With that book, I would we would just I'd take a lot of breaks. And in fact, I got a funny message from Cassandra Campbell, who is a wonderful, wonderful narrator, and she was like, "I'm listening to Educated right now. Are you okay?"
Oh, oh.
And I said, "I wasn't when I was recording it, Cass, but, I'm okay now."
Jessica in the Q&A says, "I loved An Anonymous Girl, which you co-narrated with Barry Kreinick.
Yeah.
What kind of interaction, if any, did the 2 of you have before and or during the recording process?"
Yeah, so that's a good question generally about, co-narrations, which, again, depending on the publisher, sometimes there's a director who can, kind of let you know what the other person is doing and you all coordinate. In that particular situation, Barry and I, there wasn't a director, and so we just exchanged some emails, with our thoughts about the characters, making sure our pronunciations were in line, and then sent each other some character samples, so that, you're never gonna sound exactly like the other person, but if you can kind of grab their cadence a little bit or, a breathy quality if that's what they have. I mean, I think, as if I recall with that book, Barry was kind of doing a nice slow, sort of sadistic psychologist voice. And so I would try to latch onto that in my sections. Um, and that is as close as you get to actually acting with another person in this world.
Although I have noticed a trend, and I think I've mainly seen it in the sort of the originals that Audible's doing, of full cast recordings that are
Yeah.
more like readers' theater. Do you like that?
I do, I like that a lot. I think that I mean, there's always the possibility of it sort of being overused or used for the wrong books, but in the situation where it's used well, like in Daisy Jones and the Sixth, where I don't think a book has ever been more suited to exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it's written as a fake oral history. So to be able to have all these different voices talking, it's a beautiful fit for that book. Um, I think that there's a difference between dual narration or full cast where people are doing their own sections, and then duet narration that you will see a lot in romance, particularly where you're actually sharing lines back and forth as if you're in conversation. And I find all of it really fun and really interesting because I'm an actor, and I I also like doing scripted original podcasts, where you can actually be in a studio with other actors doing a radio play. That's really fun as well. It's a whole world.
Yeah. And uh, we have a couple of questions about how being an actress shaped being a narrator. Um, and I think this sort of counter example is people who come to narration from like voiceover work or even radio broadcasting, and they have fantastic voices, but that isn't quite the same thing as being a voice actor, right?
Mhm.
So Tiffany, for instance, says, how did your career as an actress help with this career?
It helped in terms of what I wanted to do with this career, like my interpretation of books. To your point about people coming in through different doors, there are many audiobook narrators who don't do character voices, and they're still delightful to listen to. Um, and, for me, it was that was just a I wanted to be able to perform. That's what interests me. So, the main challenge, though, is realizing that you don't have, as an actor, all of your tools in front of you. I can't use my face, I can't use my body. Um, I would listen back to
Audience, right?
Right, I have no feedback. I would listen back to, like, earlier books that I did where I would think I was being very dry or something, and realize that because an audience can't see my face, can't see me roll my eyes when I say a line, they're not I sound dead. Like, I don't there's nothing interesting going on, so having to train my voice to make up for what I'm losing in my physicality. Not to say that I'm not gesturing in the booth, because I am, but, you just can't rely on everything else. It's really gotta come through the voice, and that's an adjustment period. And then to strip it back down when I'm doing on camera again and remember that I can move is, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and
tricky.
and then certainly using your voice, but a different medium. For year does feel sort of cinematic. I mean, you can picture what's going on in a very definitive way.
Sorry, you were breaking up there. Say that
Oh,
again?
sorry, my Oxford year, it feels
Oh.
cinematic. It feels like you wrote it picturing how it would play out on a screen
Mm.
or in an audiobook. But that's a different medium entirely, right? Like, in
It
your
is.
head, with all these ways you play with words, is the written word substantially different from the spoken word? Are you hearing it as you write it?
I am definitely hearing it as I'm writing, and I'm working on something right now, and I'm already seeing the pitfalls that are gonna happen in audio, and I'm, like, very cognizant of that. And I wish I could turn that off, but it's impossible. I think to go back to the, like, very first thing out of the gate, which was I approach the world as an actor, and I approach writing still as an actor, to the extent that It is definitely, I'm seeing the movie in my head as I'm writing. I'm feeling how movement, um, inspires dialogue. Um, all of those things that you deal with as an actor, compounded by I have to remind myself sometimes, though. There was an interesting, point in my Oxford year. There's a scene in there where the character makes a very kind of polarizing decision, to and sort of offensive and insulting, and I understood exactly why she was doing it in the moment as an actor, and it took me a couple of drafts with some people giving me comments to be like, "I don't know why is she being this horrible human being right now?" And I'm like, "No, no, no, she's not, because," and then I, like, acted it out, and they were like, "Oh, okay, but that's not, you gotta write that." Like, I you can't just perform it. You have to walk the reader through why they're doing this. And that is definitely something that I always have to remind myself to do.
Um, Tiffany asks, is it harder to narrate your own book?
Yes. Yeah. It was an incredibly difficult, experience, and not just because the book itself is difficult. Like, it would be a challenging book if it had just been given to me, but it was also, um, turning off the editorial brain is impossible, and my editor made me promise that I would not, touch the manuscript after recording it, and I did.
Admirable self-control.
Yeah.
Brian asks, how do you manage your voice with recording every day? It seems like it might wear it down.
And yeah, it does. I mean, if you listen to some of my earlier books, my voice has changed a lot, and part of that is just, a decade of getting older, but a lot of it is I use my voice a lot. And I hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. I usually have like 3 big mason jars a day of water. I've always got tea going. Um, I don't, on days that I'm recording, which is most days, I don't have dairy. Um, I just try to be as nice to it as possible. I don't smoke, you know, don't very minimal drinking, again, if I know I have to record the next day. I it's the priority, it has to be.
Yeah.
Try not to get sick. I mean, honestly, this year, I was always that person on a plane with, like, a mask and wiping everything down, and I was always that person. And
We're all you.
this is the first year, because I don't see anyone, that I have gotten through this entire year without a cold. But
There's a tiny, tiny silver lining.
yeah, it's been great for audiobook narrators.
Um, Cherie asks, how is the narrator chosen for a book?
It depends on the book. It also depends on, what the author may have in their contract. So typically, at least when I started, the producer, had a lot more discretion and autonomy and would just kind of cast somebody in it. Like, I think I got a lot of books that I probably normally wouldn't have gotten if the author had any say in it, but they were just like, "Yeah, she'll do it." And now I think it's a more collaborative process, as authors have learned to care more about audio, that audio is really important. Um, and so they will often get a choice of 3 or narrator approval. Um, and then if obviously if it's a self-published or an indie book, it was just entirely the author making that decision.
Are there authors that you are like their go-to now?
Yeah, what's really been gratifying is, over the 10 years that I've been doing this, or even more, um, I've created relationships with authors. So, I've got a few, and they've become friends. And there are people who, when my book came out, were incredibly supportive and, gave me blurbs and did events with me, and, they're really good friends now. And so as a result, I will just move heaven and earth to do. Taylor Jenkins Reid is one of those people, I will do, but also that's not a hardship. Like, she
Right.
happens to be one of the greatest writers out there right now, so
This must be a lot of fun.
yes. So good, so good.
Do you feel like your voice lends itself to a particular genre over another?
I don't know, I've been very lucky in that I haven't really been pigeonholed. Every time I've gone that way. Like, I started in YA, and that was really just a function of, um, the industry at the time. That was when YA was booming. It was Twilight, and it was, and so suddenly there was all of this YA material, and most audiobook narrators were, established people who'd been doing it for a while, and just they didn't have the voice to match these young characters. And so that's how I slipped in. And I was working almost exclusively in YA, but then I got Gone Girl. And so it just like took a hard left into um, domestic thriller. And every time I think that's happening and I'm getting pushed into something else comes along. And I'm very lucky that way. I don't think I have I mean, I do a lot of women's fiction, because again, I think that's where most of my friends reside, so I do a lot of their books, but yeah.
Gone Girl must have been a challenge to narrate from the point of view of such an incredibly unlikable character.
Oh, it's so much fun though.
Yeah, right.
Oh god,
Each
that it
one
might I mean, it's still probably, like, my 2 greatest days in the studio. Like, it's just she's so much fun. Psychopaths are fun. Like, every actor will tell you on camera, that's why they're fun. Like, everyone wants to play the Joker 'cause there are no rules. Like, it's great.
Um, Nicole asked, "Do you have an audiobook pet peeve when you listen to other people's work?"
Unfortunately, I don't listen to a lot of audio because I don't have a commute, and I don't and I also, when I'm coming out of the booth after a long day, like, I don't wanna listen to talking. I really just wanna listen to music. Um, so I'm the wrong person. I'm the wrong person to ask that. Sorry.
Um, Shelby asks, "Do you have a method for recording? Do you just punch and roll, or do you have a method?"
Yes, good, Shelby. Punch and roll is the technical term, yeah. Meaning that, again, depending on the publisher, but most publishers are punch and roll. So I record, I record, I record, I screw up, I hit the space bar, I stop recording, and then I go back to the nearest break, whether that's the beginning of the previous sentence or wherever I can get in. Um, and then I record again, and what I hear is like a 2 to 3 second lead up in my headphones, and then it just automatically starts recording. So that's punch and roll. Um, Depends again on sometimes a passage will be complicated enough that if I just wanna take another run at it, like, I don't want or I'm trying to get a pronunciation where there's a language issue, and I don't wanna hear myself before I start, and so I'll record it separately and then drop it in. But, for the most part, standard punch and roll.
Have you ever had to go back because an editor said something is mispronounced or
Oh, yeah, so, yes, I should say, I mean, while I am totally alone while I am recording, the book does not then just, like, appear on Audible. It gets sent my files, my raw, terrible files get sent to the publisher or producer. They are proofed, they're listened to. I get a series of corrections back. I do the corrections, they're dropped into the file. The file's cleaned up and made pretty, and then there's usually another person doing a QC round, listening for even more mistakes, and then, it's a wrap.
um, there's a question in the chat about whether it's competitive narrating. Are there, you know, books you really wanna get that you wish wouldn't go to somebody else or
Yeah, I think it is. Well, it is especially now. I mean, honestly, when I started, audiobooks just weren't as popular as they were now, so there wasn't as much work. We were a smaller community. Independent audio production, authors doing their own audio brought people into the industry. You used to just have to start from a professional place, so you probably had a voiceover agent or, you had some connection to the industry to be able to start doing it. And now it's really like, if you want to invest in the technology and put out your samples and load them onto ACX and audition for things, you can start working as an audiobook narrator. So the community has definitely grown, but I will say objectively, this is an incredibly supportive generous industry. These are just good people. Like, they're my type of people. They're just theater nerds who like to read. Like, what? They're so great. So we have just there are more times than going the other way where I look at a book and I'm like, oh, I wish I'd gotten that. More it's the other way where somebody gets an offer that and they can't take it, but they send up a little flyer on Facebook or something like, guys, there's this book that I think sounds really cool, but I just don't have the time. And if you want me to put your name forward, let me know. It's that kind of community.
You said put it up on ACX. What's that?
So ACX is an independent audio production, a platform that is part of Audible. So an author who has their own audio rights can produce through ACX. They can audition people, and then it's a distribution platform to be on Audible.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
The audio nerds are coming out now. You said you use
Hey
Pro Tools
guys.
as your software. What is your mic app?
Oh, my mic. Okay. There is an engineer who was at Dion Studios in LA for a long time, and this is his own design. It's a U87 clone. So instead of a $4,000 mic, it's designed for audiobook narration in that you can have changes in volume. So I can be very quiet or very loud and it doesn't peak. But I have to stay very on mic.
Which is fine because you're in a tiny box.
Because I'm in a tiny space. But even still, you'd be surprised. But yeah, so he's Sebastian is his name. I will find out. I'll find out in the chat or something. I will find a way to give you his information.
Thank you. Aaron asks, has the fact that so many less people are commuting, driving over the last 10 months or so had any impact on the audiobook industry that you've noticed?
We would have thought, but new numbers have come out that actually know, if anything, there was a spike. And I think I can't really account for that, but other than just general consumption of media being up, people you can still cook and do laundry and try and ignore your kids with an audiobook.
Taking long walks because there's nothing
Yeah.
else to do.
Yeah.
Last month when we talked to some of the book editors at the Washington Post, they had surveyed their readership about sort of what kind of quarantine reader are you? And the options that emerged were like the people who want to find out everything they can about viruses and pandemics and transmission and vaccines. And then there's, the escapists who are reading sci-fi and romance and just get me off of this planet. There's the comfort readers who are going back to stuff they love and rereading. And then there was this whole fourth category, people who can't concentrate on reading at all. And I think those people might be listening to audiobooks.
That's super interesting. I found myself reading more in this time period because again, same thing, like after a full day of the news and especially because of the recording that I do for Autumn, which is very timely, very newsy, there are just some days where I'm like, okay, I need a romance novel. I need, YA. I need something that has nothing to do with any of this. So.
Yeah, just before I forget, somebody asked, can you share where we can listen to the long form journalism that you're narrating?
Sure. The company is called Autumn, which is actually now a subsidiary of the New York Times. It's spelled AUDM. And it's a subscription service that's, kind of like Hulu or something, but it's got New Yorker, New York Times now, Wired, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, just a ton of different publications. And you can also find it often embedded in a stories page. So like if you have a New Yorker subscription, you can listen to the audio. You'll see a little play button right under the headline on the New Yorker website for stories. Atlantic, same thing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Jessica says, I've rediscovered my love of fiction through listening to audiobooks on my long commute. It's such a unique way to experience a story, but so many people, including you at the top of this broadcast, seem to default to, I'd rather read the book. How do you reconcile the two?
I mean, for me, it's my own opinion about that is I think because as a performer, it's like my need to control the way that I consume narrative. Like if I either want to do it um or I just want to passively take it in. Um I think that I think a lot of people have bad out of the gate audiobook experiences. Like for the most part, when I say what I do, people are like, "Oh yeah, I tried one and I just didn't, like I was irritated or I couldn't focus or something like that." But if you can find your way in with a good narrator, and I think there's just a lot of really good narrators now, I think people realize what a gift it can be. Because not only are you able to read books you wouldn't maybe have the time to read, but you have some like world class actors performing them for you. Um, yeah, I think it's an exposure thing. There was a poll recently that 50% of Americans have at least listened to an audiobook. So they have listened to one audiobook. We reached that point. Um, and I mean, Audible's doing fine. Like subscription services are fine. You can get audiobooks through library services now. I think its popularity is that people are finding narrators that they connect with.
Mhm. And I should say you can see Julia's listing on Audible, the links in the chat, and the long form journalism format she talked about, Autumn, is
Oh,
that link
thank you.
as well. Thank you, Caitlin, for being on top of that. A couple of quick questions about sort of the business of being a narrator.
Sure.
Do you get residuals?
No.
You're just a fee for
It's a
hire.
work for hire situation. This is a this is a problem generally, like from my opinion in the industry that will never not annoy me. And it mainly is because uh this is at the intersection of two industries that live on residuals and royalties. Actors get residuals for any work that we do on camera. Publishing gets royalties on every unit sold. And somehow, in that arithmetic, the narrator has been cut out of that. Um, so that's why you have narrators, frankly, who are doing like 70 or 80 books a year to keep their head above water. And not all audiobooks are profitable, and all of that is true. But, I think we're in a position where a lot of people find books because of certain narrators, and that does not mean anything materially to us. It's a lovely compliment, but it does not translate into any kind of financial security.
Yeah. On the other hand, there you do occasionally find superstar actors doing audiobooks.
Yes.
So
I
it
don't know
kind
what their deals are.
yeah, they just yeah. Right. I'd be curious to know.
I'd be curious to know too.
Brian asks, is there a union for voice actors?
There is. It's part of the Screen Actors Guild union. The union, the industry was pretty unregulated for a long time. It wasn't union. And over the past decade, we've spent a lot of time and a lot of energy and effort unionizing it to the best of our ability. So that is the positive. The positive is that our earnings do go toward our health and retirement. So if you are making a living as an audiobook narrator, if this is kind of your full-time job, chances are you're also getting health insurance and retirement credits.
Sonia asks, can you suggest some of your favorite narrators?
I would say, well, Cassandra Campbell, who I mentioned earlier, Cass is truly wonderful. January Lavoie is incredible. Bonnie Turpin. Um, on the guy side of things, I mean, Dion Graham, McLeod Andrews, who I went to college with, I think is a real acting talent. Like you will get your dollar goes far with McLeod because he acts the hell out of everything he does. Um, Simon Vance, Robert Fass. Sorry if you're wondering why if you're hearing like boom, 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 the garbage truck just showed up. I'm super sensitive to noise. That's the other part of my job is I'm always like,
I
that's
mean,
a
I
rumble.
don't
I'm
know
not going to
if
be able
you've
to
heard
get that
my
out of.
young dog's ear flapping in the background, so all is forgiven. We're all at
There
home.
we go. There we go. Yeah.
Um, which career of the many you have had do you enjoy the most? Asks Tiffany.
I love them all, and because I love them in balance. Like, when I'm writing in the morning and I get incredibly frustrated because something isn't working, I can go and disappear into someone else's book that they made work, and it gives me hope. Um, so I really I like the balance. I don't do a lot of on camera anymore, and it's mainly because to prioritize on camera acting, it required me to structure my life in a way that just wasn't something that I wanted to do. I didn't want to have to throw everything over when I got an audition and, run all over town to do the just I've been doing it so long, 25 years, and I love acting, but I don't love the lifestyle that I would have to buy into to do it. So, if someone wants me to do it, and that comes up occasionally, I'm more than happy to, and I miss it, but I wouldn't say that's in, like, my full-time rotation right now.
Brian asks, do you have favorite characters or favorite accents? When you read a book, do you think, yay, I get to do Irish in this one or something like
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I think, general American accents are, any regional American accents I'm comfortable with, and so that can be incredibly fun. I'm thinking of a book like The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes that was all Appalachian, plus an English woman in there, and that was a fun book for that reason, besides just being a great book. Um I mean, I like doing French, again, in moderation. There's certain the thing with accents that you have to be careful of is, there's a general wisdom that you don't wanna narrate a first person account in that character's accent. Like, I've had a couple of situations where, a producer will say, "I know this is, like, set in New York and it's first person New York, but no one can listen to New York for 14 hours," or something. So, there's
that?
a
For 8 billion New Yorkers or something, right?
I know, right? They're like, "Hey, um, rude." So I think that, like, for me, that's always a balance of how far to go in an accent, especially because you have to be letter perfect. I think this is the other part of audio narration that some people don't understand is, like, I don't get to add things in. Like, when you're speaking in an accent, generally, you can have those, as you're searching for a word, I can't do that. So an accent can sometimes come off feeling and sounding kind of artificial because I have to be letter perfect to the text.
Hmm.
So it can be challenging.
Um, Tom asks, is there a favorite character that you've narrated?
I mean, my first instinct is Amy Elliott Dunn,
Yeah.
for the reasons that I mentioned before. But I loved Addie LaRue, and I also equally loved Luke in that book, the devil character.
Yeah.
He was fun.
Yeah, he must have been fun. I really, really recommend that audiobook. I'll put it
Thank
or
you. I
um,
recommend that book, period.
yeah,
It's an incredible book.
yeah, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, it's called.
Yeah.
We are almost out of time, and I want to give you a chance to tell me what you're working on right now. But quickly, Emma asks, do you have a tea of choice, a blend for
Ah,
care?
well, I'm drinking matcha right now. And I would recommend, especially right now, with everyone trying to stay healthy, good tea high in antioxidants would be good. So yeah, I've been sticking mainly to greens um at the moment. And so I'm gonna cop out and say matcha because I've been doing that every afternoon.
Out of a giant bowl, which,
Mhm.
and what are you working on?
So I'm finishing up the my next book, which I don't think I can talk about quite yet, but very soon.
There.
I can say that it is in the vein of my Oxford year in that it is a romantic dramedy that is very bookish. So a lot of in jokes for the literary community.
Well, we are your people.
Yeah, I'm like, I know,
Word museum.
thank you. So yeah, it's a very bookish book. And then I've got a spring full of recording, luckily. That's been that keeps going. I'm getting ready to do uh, a book by there was a book I did early in my career called Painted Horses, which is still one of my favorite books. It's just beautiful. It's an incredible literary novel. And his second book, I'm doing that in a couple of weeks. Malcolm Brooks is the author, and this is called Cloudmaker. And then next month, I'm getting ready to do Taylor's new book, Malibu Rising. Um, so I'm just excited. I've got
Yeah,
a
busy
good
doing
run coming
good
up.
books.
Yeah.
Well, Julia Whelan, thank you so much for spending an
Thank
hour with
you.
us. It's just been a treat.
Thank you for having me. I'm really this is I love talking about this, and thank you everyone for showing up and throwing some great questions at me. And happy listening.